Morning. So happy to be here. Thank you all so much from the Decorative Arts Trust. It's really a pleasure to get to share some of my research this morning, and their support has been really invaluable to my research this past year. So my thesis, Selling Education by the Yard, Hand Looms for Technical Education at the Philadelphia Textile School, focuses on the Philadelphia Textile School, which was founded in 1884. And this school was the first major effort to systematize the instruction of textile design and manufacturing in the country. The school provided practical experience on hand and power looms to teach the predominantly white male student body to be designers, managers, and salesmen for textile mills at the end of the 19th and into the 20th century. In my thesis, I explored the school's educational hand looms, which are pictured here, to consider how this tool facilitated an embodied understanding of technical processes to a growing class of white managers within the expanding American textiles industry. So I came to this work as a weaver myself, and I still carry the belief that some of the best learning can happen in the field and in the classroom. So I'm going to bring us right into the classroom at the Philadelphia Textile School, then we're going to zoom out and think about exactly what was happening at this institution and what the implications are for the ways we think about and narrativize the history of American design. So let's get right into it. After working a 10-hour shift as a loom fixer, 15-year-old W. Earl Smith raced against the clock to arrive on time for his evening class at the Philadelphia Textile School. Smith, an evening student at the school in the early 1900s, left work at 6:10 p.m. on the dot, ran home to grab his stack of school books and a bite to eat before catching the 30-minute Pennsylvania Railroad train south to the Broad Street station. After running the final blocks to get to school, he rarely made it in time for the start of class. Smith was one of dozens of students who took the train south from the textile districts of Kensington in the blue circle, Manayunk in the red circle, and Germantown in the orange circle to the Philadelphia Textile School on Broad and Pine Street each Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These men were learning to be managers, designers, and salesmen for textile mills. Once at the school, Smith would have joined his peers who worked in tight rows beside one another on the school's educational Dobby hand looms. This tool was the foundation of the 3-year curriculum at the Philadelphia Textile School. And as the men pressed the weight of their bodies onto the hand loom treadles, the components inside the looms lifted and lowered in a syncopated rhythm, letting out a dissonant chorus that reverberated through the classroom and down the halls of the school. Smith stood in front of his assigned loom and awkwardly reached for the fly shuttle pulley in front of him. He was intimately familiar with the operation of power looms from other mill work, but situating his body in relation to the hand loom was a new experience. The room was heavy with the scent of worn-out sweat from dozens of men who traveled to this evening class after a full day of work. Smith stared down at the threads tensioned on the loom in front of him and tried to focus. He shifted his balance, lifted his right leg, and pressed down onto the single treadle that jutted out from below the loom. As he released his body to the weight of the machine, the paw of the cast iron cylinder inside the Dobby head above him yawned open. The cylinder rotated, reset, and let out a sharp clang. At eye level within the loom's wooden frame, the shafts raised and separated the warp before him. He fumbled the pulley in his hand, tugged it towards his right shoulder, and the small shuttle flew through the open warp shed, one passage of the weft. As he lifted his leg off the treadle, the warp closed. He pulled the lathe towards himself to draw the weft into place, took a breath, and began again. The hand loom Smith was weaving on had been designed in the late 19th century to instruct men in the fundamentals of weave structure and textile design. This loom was the foundation of the curriculum at the Philadelphia Textile School. And while the educational loom's shedding mechanism, the dobby head, was similar to those used in other parts of the textile industry, this loom's narrow frame and adjustable components were uniquely designed for the purpose of instruction. Like the most prominent power looms of the day, the hand looms were built with a figuring capacity of 30 shafts and a lathe with space for multiple shuttles. This meant that students could experiment with designs, structures, and colors on the hand looms in ways that were directly applicable to their industrial pursuits. The wooden frames of the hand looms were tall, narrow, and designed to be situated in organized rows. Their frames mimicked traditional four-poster hand looms with rectilinear mortise and tenon construction, yet with a distinctly late 19th century twist. All the joints were secured with cast iron bolts to temper the expansion and contraction of the wood, a material attempt at systematic control. By the late 1890s, a decade after the Philadelphia Textile School opened, Edward France, the school's director, had proprietary ownership of this loom design and was receiving requests from textile schools opening from Massachusetts to Georgia to purchase this unique educational hand loom. So why did the country's first textile school open in Philadelphia, and why did it remain unrivaled for over a decade? Typically, New England is thought to be the apex of textile production in the country during the 19th century. And while New England mills did monopolize the production of large-scale plain textile goods, Philadelphia filled a key gap in the need for small batch, specialty domestic textile production. During the 19th century, the textile industry in Philadelphia was one of the most important sectors in the city's economy. And during the final quarter of the century, 1 in every 4 industrial laborers in the city worked in the textiles industry. The city's manufacturers thrived on small batch, seasonal production, from carpets to cloth for suitings to fancy velvets. Much of what was being produced in Philadelphia required skill in designing and a technical dexterity with machinery. Unlike New England mills, like those in Lowell, that were centralized and had an average workforce of over 900 in 1880, the average workforce in Philadelphia the same year was only 80 employees, and these were scattered among over 1,000 different manufacturers across the city. So overall, the textile industries in Philadelphia were more highly disposed to need trained workers. So spurred by exhibits of technical education at the Centennial held in 1876 in Philadelphia, a group of textile manufacturers gathered to start the textile school that was eventually founded in 1884. These men began the textile school as an autonomous department within the Pennsylvania Museum and School of Industrial Art, the museum portion of which today is the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And at the time, the School of Industrial Art had opened following the Centennial, intended to be a replica of the art schools in South Kensington, London. And as a proponent of the Industrial Art School in Philadelphia summarized, the goal of schools of industrial art was to unite mechanical skill with cultivated taste. They were founded to grow the aesthetic quality of industrial output of the United States. So while the School of Industrial Art and the Textile School shared a building on the corner of Broad and Pine Streets in Philadelphia and operated together well into the 20th century, their student bodies and overall curriculums differed substantially. The School of Industrial Art was equal parts men and women and taught classes like drawing and modeling, as you can see in the photo here, to instruct students to both become art teachers as well as designers for industrial production. The Textile School, on the other hand, was more aligned with a growing group of industrial schools concerned with technical instruction to train students in engineering and sciences. At the time, in the United States, business was expanding and modes of communication were making exchange faster and much more competitive. Some historians have referred to this period as the consolidation of corporate capitalism in the United States. So as businesses grew and diversified, a new class of worker, the middle manager, was required to oversee processes and labor. Schools like the Textile School were created to engineer the workplace. They funneled skills into an emerging white middle class, paving the way for white men to thrive within the growing industrial economy. With this in mind, let's return to Smith, the student we followed to the Textile School. Smith would have set up every part of the handloom he was using that evening as part of his training. Students learned each stage of production, including drawing in, setting up the threads for the warp, using perns for the weft, tying on to the loom. And these embodied exercises, first on the hand looms and in the second and third years on power looms, were a means to an end. They helped situate students understand the theoretical exercises they were learning in weave structure and cost analysis so that they could make informed decisions about larger processes and systems. Students kept carefully crafted notebooks for each course they took. These notebooks were used to draw weaving drafts and write out lecture notes. These practical exercises were paired with theoretical worksheets in weave structure theory. In their first year, students underwent exercises in weave structure of gradated difficulty, like those shown in these student workbooks. The goal of these exercises was to familiarize the students with different types of weave structures they could use for different varieties and grades of cloth. They would then practice these on the hand looms. Take, for example, these studies in twill weaves by student William Roshan in the early 20th century. Roshan applied what he had learned about basic weave structure to exercises in creating cloth samples on the educational hand looms. Honeycomb weave for toweling on the right, and twills for suiting on the left. Alongside loom work, students also learned color theory and geometrical designing. As the men were learning how to draft for weaving, they would apply what they were learning on the educational hand looms to explore color interlacement and structure. So the goal of the school was to produce men who were intimately and holistically familiar with textile processes so that they could implement cost efficiency measures throughout the production of goods. Managers who could fill out cost analysis sheets and understand where and how costs could be brought down. This began from the minutiae of designing a weave structure and testing it out on the hand looms during the first year through the calculations for shrinkage and loss at each stage of production during subsequent years. When the school's administrators referred to textile design, they did not simply mean figure design like we might think of as a jacquard or some kind of imagery. Most of the instruction at the school focused on the execution of and cost analysis for twills, satins, and double cloths. In other words, mid-range fabrics that could be economically produced. And the hand looms were an entryway to the basic principles of manufacturing this class of cloth. The first educational hand looms that were used at the Philadelphia Textile School were imported from British textile schools in the northeast of England, as pictured here in the early 20th century at Yorkshire College, which today is the University of Leeds. So my research uncovered that in 1885, the founders of the Philadelphia Textile School imported 4 models from England, and with the help of local machinists, altered and manufactured their own style of educational hand loom to match the machinery of the American textile industry. By the late 1890s, textile schools were opening in Lowell, Massachusetts, Atlanta, Georgia, and Clemson, South Carolina. All of these schools reached out to the Philadelphia Textile School to source the educational hand looms produced in Philadelphia. The designs produced by students at American textile schools, including the school in Philadelphia during this period, could really be described as serviceable at best. However, this was not an issue at the time. The goal had never been to surpass the fine silks produced in textile schools in Europe, as these samples in student notebook from the Zurich Silk Weaving School show. The complexity of design and use of color in contemporaneous European textile schools far surpassed what was being taught in Philadelphia. However, the education at the Philadelphia Textile School was broad and widely applicable to many aspects of the American textile industry. This provided students with flexible upward mobility throughout their careers. The comprehensive yet diffuse nature of the curriculum trained men in skills that allowed them to climb the employment ladder in ways others were unable to. I'll conclude with a case study of one student, John Crother, who attended the school through a state scholarship in the early 1890s. Born in Pennsylvania in 1867, Crother was the son of English immigrants. Following his time at the textile school, he went on to have a thriving career in the textiles industry in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Crother was placed at the Hope Webbing Company in Pawtucket in 1892 by E.W. France, the school's director. By 1897, Crother advanced to the position of foreman at the Hope Webbing Company. A decade later, he moved up once again to the role of treasurer at a cotton mill. And by that time, he rented a home as opposed to boarding, which he had done previously. By 1910, he was married, had one child, and had hired a live-in servant. By the early 1920s, Crother was not only the treasurer of the cotton mill, but had become the president. And the last census listing for Crother records that in 1930, he owned his own home and supported both his sister and his family of 3. So while Crother was not the wealthiest man on his block, like many students at the Philadelphia Textile School, his education prepared him for a path into a comfortable middle-class life. The child of immigrants, he was able to move laterally between different mills while also moving up in the chain of management. The curriculum at the Philadelphia Textile School, including the foundational experience on the hand looms, laid the groundwork for each of the roles he eventually assumed, from designer to treasurer and eventually proprietor. So as we think about the legacy of the DuPonts in the Brandywine Valley, in the first decade of the 20th century, as the DuPonts were moving from explosives manufacturing into chemical manufacturing, they would have certainly been aware of schools for technical education that were gaining prominence at the time. Likely relying on these schools to train men they hired to help operate and grow their business ventures. And again, in the 1920s, as the DuPonts embraced synthetic textile manufacturing, schools like the Philadelphia Textile School would have been an indispensable source of employees who were trained and prepared to help grow the business. So in many ways, the work occurring at the Philadelphia Textile School exemplifies quintessential American design that's focused on efficiency, utilitarianism, and is unabashedly capitalist in nature. The Philadelphia Textile School has remained in continuous operation under a number of different names, and today the school has been absorbed into Thomas Jefferson University in East Falls, Philadelphia. The educational hand looms constructed in the 19th and early 20th century are still in use by textile design students, though they've been retrofitted with computerized warp manipulation systems, as pictured on the left. You do still have to throw the shuttle, so there's some handwork still. The educational hand looms are also in use. You can see our class here visited Rabbit Goody up in Cherry Valley, New York, and to my great surprise, she had a loom from the textile school there, which I was excited to see. So this loom in general has received very little attention, so I'm really grateful that I got this past year to research it and to look more into it, because it really has shaped the way that hand weaving instruction has developed, both for textile design industrially as well as in my own experience for hand weaving and contemporary craft today. So thank you so much for letting me speak.